The long-range training facility stretched across the desert like a proving ground for modern warfare. Heat shimmered above the sand, blurring the steel targets planted far beyond what the naked eye could clearly see. This was where elite marksmen of the United States Marine Corps came to sharpen their skills, to test themselves against distance, wind, and pressure. Rifles rested on bipods like precision instruments, each one fitted with advanced optics, laser rangefinders, and ballistic computers that calculated solutions in seconds. The air buzzed with confidence, competitiveness, and youthful certainty. Young Marines moved along the firing line with practiced ease, checking data, adjusting scopes, and calling out wind speeds. Conversations were loud and full of bravado. Each man believed he belonged here, believed he was among the best. Long-range shooting had become as much about technology as talent, and the newest gear inspired a sense of invincibility. Miss a shot and the excuse was ready. Bad data, shifting wind, faulty reading. Everything had a system. Everything could be explained. Then the veteran arrived. He did not come with a group. He did not speak when he stepped onto the range. His boots were worn, his posture relaxed but solid, like a man who carried his strength quietly. Slung over his shoulder was a rifle that immediately stood out, not because it looked impressive, but because it didn't. The metal showed age. The stock bore scratches and faded marks. There were no gleaming optics, no digital displays, no modern attachments, just steel, wood, and history. A few Marines noticed him right away. At first there were only glances, then whispers. "Is that thing even allowed here?" one Marine muttered, squinting at the rifle. Another chuckled. "Looks like it fought in black and white." The laughter spread, low and casual, the kind that comes easily when confidence runs high and respect hasn't yet been learned. The veteran heard it all. He had heard worse. He simply walked to an empty bench, set his rifle down gently, and began preparing his gear with slow, deliberate movements. One Marine, younger than the rest but louder, leaned back against his bench and stared openly. His own rifle was top-tier, cutting-edge, expensive, tuned to perfection. He had qualified high, shot well, and earned his place on this range. To him, the veteran looked like a relic wandering into the wrong era. "Hey, old-timer," the Marine called out, not unkindly at first. "You sure that thing can still shoot straight?" A few snickers followed. The veteran didn't respond. He checked the chamber, wiped dust from the bolt, and adjusted his sling. His hands moved with familiarity, not nostalgia. This wasn't sentiment, it was routine. The Marine smirked, encouraged by the silence. "I mean no offense," he added, though his tone said otherwise. "But this is long-range training. 1,000 yards, that rifle belongs in a museum." This time, the laughter was louder. Range officers glanced over but said nothing. No rules were being broken, and something about the veteran's calm presence made them hesitate. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't offended. He was simply there. The Marine stood and walked closer, curiosity mixing with arrogance. He examined the rifle from a distance, shaking his head. "No scope, no computer. How do you even know you're dope?" The veteran finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, clear, and steady, eyes that had measured distance long before screens existed to do it for him. He regarded the Marine for a moment, then looked back to the rifle. "I listen," he said quietly. That was all. The Marine laughed again, but it came out shorter this time. "Listen to what?" The veteran didn't answer. He laid the rifle down, checked the wind with a small strip of cloth, and watched the mirage roll across the range. To him, the desert was speaking plainly. Wind pushed left, then eased. Heat danced unevenly. Conditions shifted in patterns that technology often missed. Other Marines began paying attention now. Something about the scene felt different. The jokes faded, replaced by curiosity. The veteran moved like someone who had no need to impress, and that unsettled them more than any boast ever could. The Marine crossed his arms. "You here to shoot or just prove a point?" The veteran paused, then looked up again. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I'm here because someone invited me," he said, "and because you don't forget how to do a thing that once kept you alive." Silence followed. The Marine hesitated, pride nudging him forward. "All right," he said finally. "Why don't you take a shot with us? We're running the 1,000-yard target." A few eyebrows raised. 1,000 yards was no joke. Even with modern gear, it demanded precision, patience, and respect. With an old rifle, it bordered on impossible. The veteran considered the offer for a moment, then nodded. "All right." Just one word, but it carried weight. As the target was confirmed and the range prepared, something shifted in the air. What had started as laughter was turning into anticipation. No one expected miracles. Most expected embarrassment. But deep down, every Marine on that line felt it. The strange sense that they were about to witness something they wouldn't forget. And the veteran, settling in beside the modern rifles with his old companion, prepared to remind them all that distance had never cared about age. The veteran's eyes scanned the horizon, calm and unwavering, while the younger Marines adjusted their scopes and calculated ballistic tables. They whispered among themselves, still half-mocking the old rifle, still certain that technology would triumph over age. But the veteran's mind was elsewhere, traveling back decades to dusty battlefields and frozen dawns, to conflicts that demanded far more than confidence. It demanded survival, skill, and instinct honed under fire. He remembered nights so cold that breath froze in the air, and days when a single shot could determine life or death, for himself and the men beside him. He had been shaped by wars that didn't offer second chances. Not every moment had room for error, and he had learned early that every detail mattered. A misread wind, a jittered hand, a faltering heartbeat, any of these could be fatal. His hands had become extensions of experience, his mind a compass for the subtleties of survival. And through it all, the rifle he carried had never failed him. Scarred, aged, yet reliable, it had earned every scratch, every dent, every patch of polished wood from constant handling. The young Marines didn't know this. To them it was just a relic, a curiosity from a bygone era. But to the veteran it was a partner. Together they had weathered storms, dust, and gunfire. Together they had made impossible shots, salvaged dire situations, and survived when others would have fallen. And in the quiet moments between battles, he had trained himself to notice things others ignored. Wind patterns shifting subtly over ridges, mirages bending light in ways no instrument could detect, and the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet as a measure of distance and stability. As he prepared for the shot now, decades of that training surfaced instinctively. He didn't need an electronic readout or digital calculator. He needed breath, posture, patience, and understanding of conditions beyond the senses of the average soldier. He adjusted the sling of his rifle, checked the bolt, and ran his hands along the stock, not nervously, but with the ease of someone who had spent thousands of hours in exact repetition. Every movement was deliberate, every touch purposeful. There was no haste, no showmanship. He had learned long ago that pride was silent, humility loud, and skill unmistakable when it mattered most. A young Marine, still barely containing a smirk, leaned over. "Seriously, old-timer," he said, voice tinged with curiosity now, "what makes you think you can even hit a 1,000-yard target with that thing?" The veteran paused, his eyes narrowing just slightly, a faint smile playing across his lips, not mocking but knowing. "Because I've done it before," he replied simply. His tone carried the weight of experience, not arrogance. It was a statement, not a challenge, and it demanded reflection rather than retort. The other Marines watched, sensing something shift. The veteran had spoken little so far, yet the air changed. The laughter of moments ago fell away, replaced by a quiet awareness. They could feel that this was no ordinary man standing among them. This was someone who had been forged in fire, someone who had survived when others had not, someone whose experience could not be replicated by manuals or digital readouts. The veteran crouched slightly, examining the target across the sand. He could see the steel plate glint faintly in the distance, far beyond where most men trusted their abilities. In his mind, he ran the shot like a ritual, calculating wind shifts by observing dust patterns, considering mirage distortion, judging humidity, and the temperature differential that would subtly alter the bullet's flight. He did not need numbers. He needed observation, patience, and discipline, the tools of a marksman who understood the battlefield intimately. He remembered his mentors, the ones who had taught him to measure every breath, every heartbeat, every twitch of muscle before a shot. How a rifle becomes an extension of the self when respect and repetition meet. And he remembered the cost of failure, etched into memory like scars. Friends lost because the fundamentals were ignored, lives wasted because arrogance outpaced skill. That was the education the Marines on the line hadn't yet earned. One Marine broke the silence. "You're serious," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "You think you can do it?" The veteran nodded, his eyes never leaving the target. "I know I can." There was no bravado in his words, only certainty. And that certainty was built on decades of proof, of experience no one else could claim. It was not about showing up the young Marines. It was about remembering what it took to succeed when every factor mattered and failure was not an option. The young Marines shifted nervously. The confidence they had worn like armor moments ago now wavered. They realized they had judged a man by appearances, by the look of his rifle, by the age of his hands and the silence in his voice. They had assumed he was outdated, irrelevant, incapable of precision. But the calm that radiated from him challenged their assumptions. It demanded respect, whether they were ready to give it or not. The veteran adjusted his position, lying prone behind the old rifle, careful and deliberate. He checked his breathing, his stance, and the alignment of the iron sights. He wasn't rushing. He wouldn't. The lesson here was already being delivered, not just in the coming shot, but in every quiet movement he made leading up to it. And as the wind whispered across the range, carrying heat and dust in waves, the veteran remained still, observing, listening, calculating. He did not need applause nor acknowledgement. All he needed was the shot, the rifle, and the discipline that had carried him through decades of service. The young Marines, watching from behind their modern rifles, began to understand. This was not a contest of technology. This was the demonstration of skill forged by fire, tested by time, and proven when it mattered most. And in that moment they learned a lesson that could not be taught by manuals or computers. Experience endures, respect is earned, and true marksmen are defined not by the weapons they hold, but by the mastery of themselves. The veteran was ready, and so without a word he waited for the wind, the right heartbeat, and the perfect moment to remind them all what mastery truly looked like. The young Marine stepped forward first, puffing out his chest with the kind of self-assured swagger that only comes from repeated success and the glow of modern gear. His rifle gleamed under the desert sun, every attachment polished, every optic calibrated, every electronic system humming with precise data. He smiled at his comrades, tapping his scope and speaking loudly, explaining how his advanced ballistic computer calculated wind, distance, and humidity down to the decimal. He made it clear, in this modern age, skill alone wasn't enough. Technology was king. He laid prone, adjusted his bipod, and took a deep breath. The steel target at 1,000 yards shimmered faintly in the heat waves rising from the sand. Sweat beaded on his brow, but he hardly noticed. Confidence was a warm armor. He exhaled slowly, aligned his sights, and fired. The shot rang across the range, echoing sharply in the empty desert air. The bullet struck close but not perfect, just shy of center. Applause and nods followed from his fellow Marines, congratulatory gestures reinforcing their belief that advanced gear and youthful confidence would always triumph. The veteran, however, did not move. He remained standing beside his old rifle, the scratches along its stock visible even from a distance. There were no electronics to whisper solutions, no digital readout to guide him, just wood, metal, and the quiet knowledge of decades. He crouched, adjusting the sling, and ran his hand across the bolt. His preparation was ritualistic, almost meditative. Each movement was deliberate, no motion wasted. He did not hurry. He did not boast. He simply prepared as he had countless times before, when a shot could mean survival or death. The younger Marines began to notice. The laughter that had filled the air just moments ago had faded into silence. There was a tension now, a realization that the veteran's presence commanded more than mere curiosity. He did not speak, did not comment on their equipment or performance. Yet the air seemed to shift around him, as if his years of experience were a palpable force. Each adjustment of the rifle, each slow, deliberate check of the sights, radiated authority born from understanding, not arrogance. He lay down on the sand, assuming a prone position that had become second nature over years of training and combat. The rifle rested firmly against his shoulder. His eyes scanned the distant target, noting the faint shimmer of heat waves, the subtle gusts of wind shifting over the ridges, the uneven pulse of the mirage dancing across the desert floor. The veteran was reading the environment, not relying on instruments. His mind moved in patterns that no ballistic computer could replicate, translating intuition and experience into precise action. The young Marine glanced at him, disbelief flickering across his face. "You really think that thing can make the shot?" he muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for the others to hear. Some of the other Marines exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected spectacle, maybe failure, maybe a lesson in humility, but they had not expected this quiet, commanding presence. The veteran did not respond. His breathing slowed. He settled the rifle, aligning it with the distant target. He measured the wind with his own senses, feeling its push against his cheek, watching its ripple across sand and steel. He exhaled carefully, holding the rifle steady, absorbing the environment into his body. Every muscle was under control, every movement rehearsed, every sense sharpened. In that moment, he became less a man and more the embodiment of precision itself. The Marine who had mocked him stepped closer, curiosity now mixed with doubt. "Seriously, what's your secret? You can't just do that with an old rifle," he whispered. The veteran's gaze never wavered from the target. "Discipline," he said quietly. "Patience, practice, experience, that is my secret." His words were calm but carried weight, and the younger Marine felt the truth of them. Skill alone was nothing without mastery of self and understanding of the shot. Other Marines began to watch, leaning forward slightly. The energy of the range shifted again, from casual competition to tense anticipation. No one moved, no one spoke. They sensed something rare about to unfold, the convergence of history, training, and sheer talent distilled into a single moment. The veteran did not seek recognition. He did not seek approval. He sought only the shot itself, the test of his own enduring skill. He breathed in slowly, held, and then exhaled. Every fiber of his being was aligned. The rifle, despite its age and scars, felt alive in his hands, an extension of his own experience. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, a sound less sharp than the modern weapons but resonant, commanding attention. The desert seemed to hold its breath with him. The young Marine's eyes widened, unsure whether to laugh or panic, as everyone realized the veteran had not rushed, had not faltered, and had taken the shot with complete control. And then they waited. The bullet traveled across the desert, invisible yet inevitable. A hush fell over the range. No one spoke, no one moved. The younger Marine's smirk vanished, replaced by a creeping tension he had never experienced. For the first time, he truly questioned his assumptions, realizing that mastery was not about the rifle, the optics, or the technology. It was about the man behind it. The veteran remained calm, his finger lightly on the trigger, ready to make adjustments for the next round if necessary. He did not watch the result immediately. He trusted in his skill, in the rifle, in the years of preparation and practice that had brought him to this point. The silence was almost deafening, punctuated only by the soft whistle of the wind and the occasional shifting of sand. The other Marines leaned forward, unspoken tension rippling through the line. They had mocked the rifle. They had doubted the veteran. But now, in the stillness before the impact, They realized they were about to witness something remarkable, something that would challenge their beliefs about technology, youth, and the enduring power of experience. And in that moment, the veteran became more than a man with an old rifle. He became a symbol of patience, discipline, and unyielding skill. The stage was set. The range waited, and all eyes, young and old, focused on the distant target, knowing that the next few seconds would change how they understood marksmanship forever. The desert sun beat down relentlessly, casting long, wavering heat waves across the firing range. The young Marines shifted uneasily behind their high-tech rifles, their confident chatter reduced to nervous murmurs. Every eye was fixed on the veteran, whose aged rifle rested in perfect alignment on the sand. He lay prone, calm and still, as if the world around him had ceased to exist. To them, it seemed impossible that anyone could strike a target 1,000 yards away without scopes, lasers, and electronic calculators. Yet here he was, poised and ready, as if the distance itself were a mere suggestion. The younger Marine who had mocked him moments ago crossed his arms, his smirk gone. Confidence had begun to falter, replaced with unease. He studied the veteran's preparation, nodding the way he measured the wind with subtle movements, observed the mirage, and calculated distance through intuition honed over decades. Every motion was deliberate, breathing, posture, grip. The veteran was not hurried, not showy. There was no arrogance, only control, patience, and quiet certainty. The veteran exhaled slowly, letting his body settle. His eye traced the distant target. He noticed every small detail, the faint shimmer of steel, the way the heat rose off the sand, the smallest ripple of wind along the ridges. These were details that modern equipment might miss or account for imperfectly. His hands, steady and practiced, rested on the rifle, making minute adjustments only he could perceive. He could feel the rhythm of the range, almost like music. The whisper of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth, the pulse of the desert around him. The young Marines grew silent. Their confidence, built on technology and training, now wavered in the presence of experience. One of them whispered, barely audible, "He's calm, too calm." Another nodded, "Feels like he knows something we don't." For the first time, they weren't just observing, they were learning. Respect, tentative but undeniable, began to replace doubt and mockery. The veteran's finger hovered gently on the trigger. He felt the weight of the rifle, the balance of its metal and wood, and the familiar resistance of the bolt. This was not just a weapon, it was an extension of himself, a partner forged through decades of practice and combat. He had spent countless hours in similar conditions, perfecting the fundamentals of marksmanship until instinct and experience became one. Today the distance was 1,000 yards, but to him the calculation was simple: patience, focus, and precision. Every young Marine on the line could feel the tension rise, like static electricity in the air before a storm. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Birds flew low, the wind stilled, and even the hum of modern gear seemed distant in comparison to the quiet authority radiating from the veteran. The 1,000-yard target was no longer just steel. It was a test, a challenge, a reminder of what mastery meant. The veteran glanced briefly at the young Marine who had mocked him, but there was no anger in his eyes, only experience, only the understanding that arrogance was temporary and skill eternal. He remembered the lessons learned in combat: patience, observation, and the discipline to wait for the perfect moment. He exhaled slowly, timing his breath with the subtle sway of the heat waves and the whisper of the wind. His heartbeat remained steady, matched to the rhythm of his preparation. He imagined the bullet's path, tracing it mentally from the rifle's chamber to the distant steel plate. Every factor mattered: gravity, wind, temperature, mirage. He didn't need a computer to calculate, his mind was precise enough. This was the culmination of years, decades of relentless practice. Each shot he had taken in his life, successful or missed, had led him to this exact moment. The range, the Marines, the skeptical observers, all faded into the background. The younger Marines watched with bated breath. The one who had mocked him could barely stand still. He realized that the veteran was not performing a stunt or trying to impress. This was mastery in action. The silence was almost unbearable, punctuated only by the faint rustle of desert wind. Time itself seemed to stretch as everyone waited for the inevitable. No one dared to speak. No one moved. Even the officers supervising the range seemed to hold their breath, watching a lesson in marksmanship unfold in real time. The veteran finally settled into position fully, his finger gently resting on the trigger. He allowed himself one last calm inhale, then held it, feeling the world contract into the moment of execution. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only preparation. He had measured everything: distance, wind, angle, mirage, and his own steadiness. The desert was speaking and he was listening. This was not a gamble, it was certainty built on decades of experience. The young Marine who had mocked him whispered, almost to himself, "I can't believe he's really going to do it." Others nodded in silent agreement. They were witnessing the difference between confidence and experience, between tools and skill, between arrogance and mastery. This was more than a shot. It was a demonstration of what discipline and practice could achieve when combined with patience and respect for one's craft. The veteran exhaled slowly, feeling the rifle settle into alignment with the target. His finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked sharply across the desert, the sound cutting through the stillness like a bolt of lightning. The shot was fired, and then silence. Every eye froze on the target, waiting, anticipating, straining to follow the invisible path of the bullet across the 1,000 yards separating them. The young Marines' minds raced. Their modern rifles, their scopes, their ballistic calculators, none of it mattered now. They had witnessed the veteran act with precision, with understanding, with patience that no machine could replicate. The moment stretched, taut and electric, as they collectively held their breath, waiting for the result of a shot that defied expectation. And in that silence, they learned something no manual, no lecture, no electronic system could ever teach. Mastery is not given. It is earned. It is measured not in technology, but in experience, patience, and unwavering discipline. And when the shot landed, everything would change. The desert held its breath. For what felt like an eternity, the sand and heat waves blurred the distance between the veteran and the 1,000-yard steel target. The younger Marines shifted nervously behind their modern rifles, eyes wide, stomachs tight with anticipation. They had fired, they had calculated, they had trusted technology, and yet nothing could prepare them for what was about to happen. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the stillness. Every grain of sand seemed suspended in the air. The veteran remained prone, calm, his finger steady on the trigger, his breathing measured, his gaze locked on the target. Then it happened. A sharp, ringing clang echoed across the range. The steel target vibrated from the impact, and the sound carried across the desert like a trumpet announcing victory. For a moment, no one moved. The younger Marines froze in disbelief. The veteran's old rifle, the one they had mocked, had delivered a perfect, center-of-target hit at a distance that few modern marksmen could achieve with cutting-edge gear. The applause and chatter of moments ago had disappeared entirely, replaced by stunned silence and awe. The spotter, a seasoned Marine with decades of experience himself, adjusted his binoculars and confirmed what everyone already suspected. "Dead center," he said, his voice low but tinged with astonishment. "Absolutely dead center." The younger Marine who had mocked the veteran's rifle stood motionless, mouth slightly agape. His mind raced, attempting to reconcile what he had witnessed. The arrogance that had fueled his confidence moments ago now dissolved into disbelief, humility, and a touch of shame. He had assumed technology and youth could easily outmatch age and experience. He had assumed skill was secondary to modern equipment. And now he realized he had been completely wrong. The veteran did not celebrate. He did not grin. He remained prone for a moment longer, checking the rifle, feeling its weight in his hands, and acknowledging the conditions he had calculated before the shot. This was not a moment of showmanship. It was the culmination of decades of experience, training, and discipline. Every movement, every calculation, every moment of preparation had led to this singular outcome. The rifle had merely been the extension of a master's skill. Around him, Marines began to murmur among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging glances of awe. "How did he do that?" one whispered. Another said, "I thought that thing was ancient." The veteran remained silent, letting the result speak for itself. Silence had carried more authority than any words ever could, and now the sound of a single, perfect shot reinforced that lesson. The young Marine who had mocked him finally spoke, voice shaking slightly. I didn't think it was possible." The veteran finally looked up, his eyes calm but piercing. "It's not about the rifle," he said simply. "It's about understanding, patience, and discipline. The fundamentals never change, no matter the technology." As the applause of stunned admiration spread quietly along the line, the veteran carefully worked the bolt for the next shot. He repeated his preparation, checking the wind again, feeling the rifle's balance, and aligning his breathing with the rhythm of the desert. His movements were deliberate, each one a reminder that mastery is earned through repetition, patience, and respect for the craft. The young Marines watched closely now, their previous arrogance replaced by curiosity and a desire to learn. The reality they had been confronted with could not be ignored. Experience and skill outweighed even the most advanced modern equipment when applied correctly. This was a lesson they would remember far longer than any number on a ballistic calculator or any high-tech scope reading. The Marine who had been most vocal in his mockery stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the veteran and the rifle. "Teach me," he said, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the spell. "I want to learn how you do that." There was no pride in his voice now, only humility and an eagerness to absorb what had been demonstrated so definitively. The veteran nodded slightly. "Then watch and listen," he said. "There's more to marksmanship than gadgets. Every shot begins with patience, understanding the environment and mastery of yourself. Everything else is secondary." The other Marines leaned in, realizing they had witnessed more than a perfect shot. They had witnessed a demonstration of principles that transcended technology, age, and initial assumptions. The old rifle, once dismissed, now commanded respect, not for its history alone, but because it had delivered results when it mattered most. As the veteran prepared to fire another round, the young Marines began to take notes mentally, observing his stance, his breathing, his careful attention to subtle environmental cues. Each movement was a lesson in fundamentals. Each decision, however small, was the product of decades of repetition and real-world experience. They realized that technology could aid, but it could never replace understanding, intuition, and discipline. The desert echoed once more with the rifle's sharp crack as the veteran fired a second round. Again, it struck precisely where he intended, reinforcing the lesson that had already been delivered. The young Marines exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly nodding with newfound respect. The veteran had not only proven the rifle's capability, but had also proven the enduring power of experience, patience, and mastery. And in that moment, a quiet shift occurred along the firing line. Mockery and doubt were replaced by respect, humility, and the recognition that true skill does not rely on the newest tools but on understanding and discipline. The veteran's demonstration had delivered more than just a shot. It had delivered a lesson that every Marine present would carry with them forever. The young Marine who had laughed first swallowed hard, finally stepping forward with an air of respect. "Teach me everything," he said quietly. "I want to shoot like that someday." The veteran offered no answer beyond a nod, letting his actions continue to speak. Skill and mastery, after all, required no words. They demanded practice, observation, and patience. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its harsh light across the desert range, every Marine on the line realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. The old rifle had fired, but it was the veteran who truly commanded attention, a man whose experience, calm, and discipline had turned skepticism into awe and mockery into respect. The veteran finally lowered his rifle and sat back on his heels, dust settling around him as the desert sun beat down. The young Marines remained frozen, their eyes still fixed on him, their minds replaying the flawless shots they had just witnessed. What had seemed impossible a few minutes ago was now undeniable. The old rifle, once a subject of ridicule, had proven its worth. But the veteran knew the true lesson was not in the weapon. It was in the mastery of fundamentals, in the discipline and patience that allowed a marksman to triumph regardless of the tools at hand. The Marine who had mocked him most openly stepped forward, voice quiet, almost reverent. "Sir, how did you do that?" He didn't need to ask about technique, he needed to understand the principle. The veteran looked at him steadily, and for the first time the words that had guided him through decades of service began to flow. "It's not the rifle," he said. "It's fundamentals, patience, observation, control, and understanding. Technology can assist, but it can never replace mastery of yourself and the conditions around you." He gestured toward the distant target. "Every factor counts: wind, heat, elevation, mirage, breathing, heartbeat. Everything is connected. You can't measure some things with a scope or a computer. You feel them, you predict them, you adjust before you even fire. That's why experience matters. That's why repetition matters. That's why skill doesn't come from gadgets, it comes from understanding the craft itself." The young Marines listened, captivated. They had studied manuals, relied on calculators and ballistic software, and trained rigorously. But nothing had prepared them for witnessing experience in action. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that the veteran had internalized decades of lessons, that each imperceptible adjustment he made had been born of practice under pressure, under life-or-death conditions, under conditions far harsher than a training range could simulate. He continued, his voice steady but carrying weight. "A shot isn't just a mechanical action. It's a combination of preparation and awareness. You must read the environment as much as your rifle. You must control yourself more than the weapon. Confidence alone won't carry you. It can't replace observation. Arrogance can get a man killed. Respect for fundamentals keeps him alive." One Marine, still shaken, asked, "So, all this gear, all the new rifles, they don't matter?" The veteran shook his head slowly. "They help, but they are secondary. The tools do not shoot for you. The fundamentals, the discipline, the patience, those are what make a marksman. You can have the most advanced scope in the world, but without skill, you'll miss when it counts. Technology is an aid, not a crutch." The young Marines began absorbing the lesson, recognizing the gap between their understanding and his. Their mockery had been born of arrogance and ignorance, their confidence unchecked. But now humility replaced laughter, respect replaced doubt. They saw in him a mirror of what they could aspire to if they were willing to study, practice, and internalize the principles of marksmanship. The veteran leaned back slightly, observing the Marines' reactions. He could feel the shift in their mindset, the beginnings of comprehension that what they had dismissed so easily required years of mastery. And he knew the moment was teaching more than shooting, it was shaping character. "Marksmanship is a reflection of discipline," he said. "It's a mirror of your preparation, your focus, and your patience. You cannot fake it. You cannot rely solely on instruments. You must earn every hit." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The rifle doesn't make the shooter, you make the shooter. That lesson, more than any target, is what you must carry with you. Respect the fundamentals and the results will follow. Ignore them and you'll fail, even with the best equipment." The Marine who had mocked him nodded slowly, understanding the depth of the lesson. "Sir, can you show us? Can you guide us so we can understand what you just demonstrated?" The veteran's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Watch, listen, and replicate. Every movement has meaning. Every decision matters. Every adjustment is part of a bigger understanding. The rifle is just the tool. The marksman is the one who earns the result." As he began walking them through subtle principles, body positioning, controlled breathing, trigger discipline, and environmental observation, the young Marines followed closely. The desert air vibrated with quiet focus as the veteran demonstrated not just shooting, but mastery. They learned how to read wind and mirage, how to feel temperature shifts, and how to prepare for the shot with patience. Every instruction was rooted in decades of experience, yet delivered with clarity and humility. By the time the sun began its slow descent, painting the range in shades of gold and orange. The Marines had absorbed far more than they expected. They had learned that confidence without discipline is fragile, that technology without understanding is limited, and that true skill is earned through repetition, observation, and patience. The veteran had not just hit a distant target, he had shifted perspectives, transforming arrogance into respect and ignorance into curiosity. The range, once filled with laughter and mockery, now hummed with focused determination. The young Marines would not forget what they had witnessed. They had seen the difference between tools and mastery, between confidence and skill, between arrogance and discipline. And the veteran, quietly packing his rifle, left them with one final thought: mastery endures and it is earned, never given. The veteran rose from the sand, his rifle slung over his shoulder with the ease of a man who had carried it through decades of service. The younger Marines remained prone for a moment longer, still absorbing the lessons of the previous shots. What had started as mockery, a casual dismissal of a rifle that looked decades old, had transformed into deep respect, not for the weapon, but for the man who wielded it. They had witnessed skill, patience, and mastery that no technology could replicate. And now, curiosity replaced doubt, and humility replaced arrogance. The Marine who had mocked him most openly stepped forward, his expression tentative but eager. "Sir, would you show us?" he asked. "Teach us what you just did." His voice carried humility tinged with awe. The veteran nodded slightly, his calm eyes meeting theirs. "If you're willing to listen, I'll guide you. But you must understand, this isn't about shortcuts or gadgets. It's about fundamentals, patience, and respect for your craft." Other Marines quickly joined, gathering around the veteran. The range was quiet except for the faint desert wind, and every soldier was attentive, hanging on his every word. He demonstrated stance, breathing, and trigger control, showing how the rifle became an extension of the body rather than a separate tool. "The shot begins before you even squeeze the trigger," he said. "It begins with observation, preparation, and control. Your body, your mind, the environment, they are all part of the equation." He let the younger Marines try small adjustments, correcting their posture and guiding their breathing. At first, their attempts were clumsy. Muscles they had never trained for precision fired erratically. Their shots wavered, some missing entirely, some hitting near the target but lacking consistency. Frustration built, but the veteran remained patient. He explained that mastery wasn't achieved in a single shot. It was earned over hundreds, thousands of repetitions, each one reinforcing understanding. As the hours passed, something began to change. The Marines started noticing details they had previously ignored: the subtle changes in wind across the desert floor, the shimmer of heat waves distorting their aim, the importance of timing each shot with a controlled exhale. They began listening to the veteran's advice, internalizing his corrections, and appreciating the discipline required to translate knowledge into action. Every adjustment, every repeated attempt, built more than skill. It built respect for the craft and for the man who had endured and mastered it. The veteran shared stories of past battles and experiences, emphasizing lessons learned not just about marksmanship, but about life, patience, and responsibility. He told them about days when a single shot had saved a comrade, or when discipline had prevented disaster. The stories were vivid, sometimes stark, and they carried weight far beyond the firing line. The Marines listened intently, absorbing both the technical advice and the wisdom embedded within each tale. The Marine who had mocked him began to understand the depth of what he had witnessed. I never realized it wasn't about the rifle," he admitted quietly. "It's about understanding everything else first, the environment, yourself, the fundamentals." The veteran gave a faint nod, acknowledging his insight. "Exactly. Tools don't make the man. Knowledge, patience, and respect do. Technology is an aid, not a replacement. Never forget that." By mid-afternoon, the Marines were firing with increased precision. Though they had not yet reached the veteran's level, they were improving with each attempt. Their confidence returned, but this time it was tempered with humility and respect. Laughter returned to the line, but softer, warmer, reflective of camaraderie rather than ridicule. The veteran watched silently, pleased to see his lessons taking root. He didn't need to comment. The transformation spoke for itself. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the range, the veteran encouraged the Marines to reflect on their progress. He reminded them that mastery is ongoing, that every shot is an opportunity to learn, and that true respect, both for the craft and for others, must be earned. The younger soldiers nodded, understanding for the first time the depth of what they were experiencing. This was more than training. It was a passing of knowledge, a bridge across generations. Finally, the veteran packed his rifle and prepared to leave. The young Marines watched him, no longer with skepticism but with admiration and gratitude. They had witnessed a perfect demonstration of skill, but more importantly, they had been taught patience, humility, and discipline. The veteran's presence had reminded them that experience could not be replaced by equipment, and that mastery was measured in understanding, not appearances. The Marine who had mocked him the most approached, extending his hand. "Thank you, sir," he said, sincerity shining through. "I hope I can learn half of what you know someday." The veteran shook it firmly, a faint smile crossing his face. "You will," he said quietly, "if you're willing to work for it." As the Marines packed up their own equipment, the range carried a sense of shared accomplishment. The old rifle had become a symbol, not of age or obsolescence, but of the enduring value of skill, discipline, and respect. Brotherhood had formed, not just between the veteran and the younger soldiers, but among the soldiers themselves, united by the lessons they had witnessed and the humility they had gained. The sun dipped lower, turning the desert sky shades of amber and gold. The veteran began his walk back across the range, rifle slung over his shoulder, leaving behind more than just the sound of gunfire. He left a legacy, the lesson that mastery, patience, and respect transcend age, that skills honed through experience are timeless, and that the bond formed through shared learning is stronger than any technology or tool. And as the Marines watched him disappear into the horizon, they understood something profoundly simple yet deeply true. True strength is measured not by what you hold in your hands, but by what you carry in your mind and heart. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert range. The veteran slung his rifle over his shoulder, the wood worn smooth from decades of service. The young Marines watched in silence, still processing everything they had witnessed. What had begun as mockery had transformed into awe, respect, and a profound understanding of skill, patience, and discipline. The old rifle, once dismissed as outdated, had delivered perfection, but it was the veteran who had truly commanded attention. He wasn't just a marksman. He was a teacher, a mentor, and a living embodiment of experience earned over decades. The Marine who had mocked him the most remained rooted to the spot, a mixture of humility and admiration in his eyes. "Sir," he said quietly, "thank you for everything today." The veteran looked at him, calm and steady, and nodded. No words of self-praise were needed. His actions had spoken louder than any lecture ever could. The lesson wasn't just about hitting a distant target. It was about understanding one's craft, respecting the fundamentals, and mastering oneself. Other Marines approached slowly, some shaking hands, some offering quiet nods of gratitude. Each interaction was brief but meaningful. The veteran had reminded them that mastery is not measured by the tools you wield, the technology at your disposal, or even by raw talent. It is measured by patience, practice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. These principles were timeless, and they would carry them forward far beyond this range, far beyond their military careers. As he began to walk back toward the edge of the training grounds, the younger Marines fell in step behind him, listening quietly to any instruction he offered along the way. Every movement he made reflected the calm confidence of a man who had faced countless battles and survived because he understood the stakes, the environment, and the limits of human ability. His presence was a reminder that experience cannot be replicated. It must be earned. The desert wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of distant artillery ranges and the soft crunch of sand beneath boots. The veteran's figure seemed to blend with the golden hues of the setting sun, his rifle a shadow of history against the sprawling landscape. The Marines walked silently behind him, absorbing every detail, not just of marksmanship, but of character, humility, and quiet authority. They realized they had witnessed more than just a demonstration of skill. They had witnessed a lesson in life, leadership, and legacy. The Marine who had laughed first now spoke, voice steady but reflective. "I understand now, it's not the rifle, it's everything else. The discipline, the patience, the respect for the craft, for yourself." The veteran nodded once, approvingly. "Exactly. Technology can help, but it will never replace understanding. Your mind and body are your most important tools." For the younger Marines, the impact was profound. They had been humbled by the demonstration, inspired by the mentorship, and motivated to practice harder, learn deeper, and respect the fundamentals. They had seen firsthand that mastery could endure across generations, that experience could not be faked, and that true skill is earned through relentless commitment. The veteran had not only hit a distant target, he had reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be a Marine, a soldier, and a professional in any field. The veteran paused briefly at the edge of the range, glancing back one last time at the group. His eyes met theirs, calm and knowing. He did not need to say anything. His presence, his actions, and his lessons spoke for themselves. The Marines absorbed this final gesture, understanding that respect is earned through performance, integrity, and consistency, not words or bravado. The veteran had taught them that mastery is measured not just in hits on a target, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your abilities and trusting your preparation. As he walked away, the young Marines felt a sense of continuity, as though a bridge had been built across time. They were not just students. They were heirs to knowledge passed down through experience, a living link in the chain of skill, discipline, and excellence. They would carry this lesson forward into every aspect of their careers, every training exercise, and every challenge they faced. The veteran's legacy was not in a single shot, but in the transformation he had inspired in those who had witnessed it. The desert grew quiet, the sun now dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. The veteran disappeared into the fading light, leaving behind only footprints in the sand and an indelible impression on the Marines he had mentored. They stood together for a moment, reflecting on what they had learned, feeling the weight of respect and responsibility settle over them. The lesson was clear. True mastery endures, respect is earned, and skill, once forged, becomes timeless. And so the old rifle, carried across battlefields and through decades of service, rested quietly in the veteran's hands once more. It was more than a weapon. It was a testament to discipline, patience, and experience. The Marines understood now that it was not the rifle that had made the shot remarkable. It was the man who had wielded it. The veteran had reminded them that excellence is timeless, that lessons are best learned by example, and that true skill transcends technology, age, and circumstance. The sun disappeared completely, leaving the desert bathed in twilight. The range was empty now, but the echoes of the day, the perfect shots, the lessons learned, the laughter replaced by respect lingered. The veteran had walked away, but the legacy remained. Every Marine present carried it forward, forever changed by what they had witnessed. The quiet power of experience, the enduring value of fundamentals, and the timeless lesson that mastery is earned, respected, and never forgotten.